My name is Lacey Whitmore. I'm 31 years old, and the morning my husband handed me the keys to a brand new car with a red bow on the antenna, I hugged him. I thanked him. I drove to work in it with the windows down because it still smelled like the dealership, and I thought that was the best smell in the world. I had no idea that a man I had never met was, at that exact moment, standing in a garage bay 20 minutes away, looking at something under that car's hood that made his hands start shaking. I had no idea that the car my husband bought me, the car he said was a gift, the car he handed me with that particular smile he wears when he wants credit for something, was not going to make it to the highway. I had no idea about any of it. Not yet. I want you to stay with me through this whole story because I need you to understand how it felt to be standing in that driveway. I need you to understand who I was before the phone rang. Because if you don't know who I was, the rest of this won't make sense. Before I go back to the beginning, if you're already feeling something right now, if something about this is already sitting heavy, hit that subscribe button and the like button before we go any further. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every single one. I promise you that. Now let me take you all the way back. I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, East Side. The kind of neighborhood where everybody's lawn had at least one thing in it that didn't belong. A car on cinder blocks, a washing machine on a porch, a dog tied to a chain-link fence who never seemed to have a name. We weren't the worst-off family on the block, but we weren't far from it. My dad drove long-haul routes that kept him gone 3 weeks at a time. My mom worked the laundry facility at a hospital on double shifts for most of my childhood. She came home smelling like industrial detergent and fell asleep in the recliner before dinner was finished. I had an older brother, Derek, who was gone by the time I was 14. He just left. Called sometimes, not often. The house after that was the kind of quiet that teaches you things you never asked to learn. It teaches you how to be small, how to not need much, how to be grateful for whatever shows up because you know how long it might be before something else does. My dad came home from a 3-week route when I was 9 and brought me a bicycle. It was second-hand, and he had spray-painted it red. Bright, fire engine red, a little uneven in places where the metal had dents. He handed it to me like it was the most natural thing, like nothing about it required explanation, and said, "It's the same as new if you don't look too close." I rode that bicycle until the wheels literally would not turn anymore, and I told myself it was the same as new. I kept telling myself that about a lot of things for a very long time. That is the sentence my childhood gave me. It's the same as new if you don't look too close. And I carried it with me into adulthood like a tool, like a coping mechanism, like something useful, when really it was a cage. I got a partial academic scholarship to the University of Tennessee. Partial. The gap I covered by working 20 hours a week at the campus copy center, standing at a machine that smelled like warm toner, cutting my fingers on cardstock, saving receipts for things I couldn't always afford. I graduated with a communications degree and approximately $40 of breathing room in my checking account and the profound ability to make something look like it was more than it was. I got a job at a healthcare staffing firm. Coordinator. Nothing glamorous, nothing that made anyone lean in at a dinner party, but it was mine. I built something with my own hands and my own time and my own choices. Every apartment I ever lived in, every car I drove before the white SUV, every bill I ever paid, I did that. I did that without anyone handing me anything with a bow on it. And if you have ever been the person who holds everything together quietly, the person who everyone assumes is fine because you never say otherwise, I think you already understand everything about who I was when I walked into my marriage. I think you know exactly how a person like me can end up thanking someone for a gift they were never meant to survive. If that hits somewhere familiar, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Hit like, subscribe, because this story is not over, and I need you here for what comes next. Now, Griffin. I met Griffin Whitmore at a mutual friend's birthday dinner when I was 26. He was 32, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, the kind of man who makes everyone in the room feel like they have his full attention, even when the room is full of people. He came from Charlotte. His father was in commercial real estate. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never been told that he was too much. He made me feel chosen. That is the word. Chosen. Like out of everyone he could have been paying attention to, I was the one worth it. For someone who spent her whole childhood learning how to need less, being chosen felt like oxygen. We dated for 18 months. He proposed at the kitchen table in my apartment. No restaurant, no big production, just us and dinner getting cold, and him sliding a ring across the table like it was the simplest thing in the world. I loved that. I loved that he didn't make it a performance. I should have paid more attention to how easily he could turn the performance on and off. My coworker Simone had been at the firm for about a year before I really understood who she was. Simone Adler, 33, a Nashville girl, the daughter of a high school principal and a social worker, which means she grew up in a house where feelings got named and examined and discussed at dinner like homework. She had a 4-year-old daughter named Willa, and an easy, devastating ability to see people for exactly what they were. The first time Simone and I actually talked, I mean really talked, not just the copy machine and the conference room talk, was because she knocked on my car window in the parking lot at 7:45 in the morning and said, "I watched you walk in 3 days in a row carrying everything by yourself, and I just wanted to check if you were okay." I told her I was fine. She said, "Yeah, that's what I thought." And she got in the passenger seat, and we sat there for 20 minutes, and she told me about her divorce, and I told her about nothing because I wasn't ready. But I went home that night feeling something I couldn't fully name, like someone had noticed. Griffin didn't like Simone. He never said so directly, he was too careful for that. But he would make small comments. "Seems like she has a lot of opinions. Doesn't she have a kid to get home to?" Little precise cuts that I filed away and tried not to think about too hard. I filed away a lot of things I tried not to think about too hard. There was a second phone. I saw it once, on a Sunday morning, sitting on the bathroom counter while Griffin was in the shower. I stood and looked at it for about 4 seconds. When he came out, it was gone. I asked him about it that evening. He said it was a work phone, that his company had issued them a second line for a new client situation. He said it calmly, completely, with a reasonable explanation already inside the answer, like it had been waiting there. I told myself, same as new if you don't look too close. That is who I was the Tuesday morning he led me out to the driveway with that particular smile. That is who I was when I hugged him and took the keys and drove away in a car I did not know was supposed to kill me. I parked in the firm's lot at 8:37. I sat for a minute just feeling the seats. They were softer than my old ones. The console was clean. The dash showed a perfect range on a full tank. I was already thinking about the drive home. At 8:47, my phone rang. Number I didn't recognize. Knoxville area code. A man's voice. Low, rough, measured. Like someone who had decided exactly what he was going to say before he dialed. "Is this Lacey Whitmore?" I said yes. "My name is Ray Dubose. I'm a mechanic. I do pre-delivery inspections for a few lots around here, and I need you to do something for me right now, and I need you to take me seriously." He paused. One beat. "Do not start that engine again until I can look at that car." I felt my hand tighten on the phone. I said, "Which car?" He said, "The white one your husband just bought you." I sat in that parking lot for 4 minutes after I hung up. I know it was 4 minutes because I watched the clock on the new dash the whole time. 8:48, 8:49, 8:50, 8:51. I watched the numbers change and I did not move. The engine was off. I had turned it off the second Ray said, "Don't start it again," some animal part of my brain responding before the rest of me caught up. I want to tell you I immediately knew what it meant. I want to tell you I put it together right away, that I was sharp and clear and certain. But the truth is that my first thought, my very first thought, was that there was a recall. Some factory defect. Something the dealership had missed and this mechanic had caught. My first thought was that Griffin had accidentally bought a dangerous car, and this man was doing us a favor. I sat with that thought for about 90 seconds. It was a comfortable thought. It was a thought that kept everything in its right place. Then I thought about the second phone. Then I thought about the insurance papers. 8 months before that morning, Griffin had come home with a folder and set it on the kitchen table after dinner while I was loading the dishwasher. He said it was refinancing paperwork. He said the rates had shifted and his guy had found us a better position, and it was all pretty standard, but he needed my signature in a few places. He walked me through it quickly. Here, and this one too. And I signed where the little adhesive tabs were because I trusted him, and because the dishwasher was still running, and because he had already explained it, and I didn't want to seem like I didn't trust him by asking him to explain it again. Sitting in that parking lot, with Ray Dubos's phone number still warm on my screen, I thought about those tabs, about how I had never actually read what was on those pages, about how efficiently Griffin had moved through them. I called Simone. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I need you to come outside. I'm in the lot. Something happened and I can't say it inside." She didn't ask questions. 40 seconds later, she was at my passenger window in her burgundy wrap dress, and I unlocked the door and she got in and I told her everything. Ray's name, what he said, the exact words, "Do not start that engine." The way his voice sounded, not panicked, something worse than panicked, steady. The way someone sounds when they have seen a thing clearly and are making themselves say it out loud anyway. Simone listened without interrupting. That is one of her gifts. She does not fill your pauses with her own reactions. She lets the thing land before she responds. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment. She said, "Tell me you're not about to explain this away." I said, "I don't know what this is yet." She said, "I do." And then she said the thing I had not expected. "I've known something was wrong for 3 months. I didn't know how to say it." She reached into her canvas tote and pulled out her phone. She opened it to a screenshot she had saved, a public social media post, a woman I didn't recognize, tagged at a restaurant in Charlotte. The date on the post was last November. The weekend Griffin had told me was a client conference. I remembered that weekend. I had made soup because it was cold and I ate it alone at the kitchen table, and I had been glad he was doing well at work. The woman in the photo was laughing at something off camera. She looked easy and warm. She looked like someone who had never been told to not look too close. I stared at the photo. I didn't feel what I expected to feel, not the hot rush of jealousy or the collapse I might have predicted. I felt something quieter and more frightening. I felt like a room where someone had just turned on all the lights. I said, "How long do you think this has been going on?" Simone said, "The woman isn't why I'm scared right now. The car is why I'm scared right now." She said it quietly. She said it the way you say something when you need the other person to really hear it, and you know that saying it louder won't help. I think that was the moment I understood. Not the cut break line yet, not the full shape of it, but the direction. The general, terrible direction of what I was sitting inside. I want to ask you something right now, because this is the part of the story that has stayed with me the longest. Not the fear, not even the anger, but this. Have you ever had someone use the exact shape of your trust against you? Have you ever realized that someone studied how you love, how specifically and completely you love, and then used that as a blueprint? Because that is what I was sitting with in that parking lot. Not that Griffin had done something terrible, but that he had needed to know me very well to do it this particular way. Drop that in the comments. Tell me if you've ever felt that. I read every single one, and I mean that. We drove to Ray's shop together in Simone's car. It was off a county road I had passed 100 times without noticing, one of those small, corrugated metal buildings that looks like it has always been exactly there, surrounded by gravel and the particular smell of oil and cold air. Ray was waiting outside when we pulled up. He was a big man, heavy-set through the chest, wearing navy coveralls with his name on the patch. He had a red shop rag in his left chest pocket that he kept pulling out and folding and putting back, not wiping anything, just something to do with his hands. He shook my hand. His grip was careful, like he was already treating me gently. He showed me the photographs on his phone first. He walked me through them slowly. Here is the line. Here is where it sits. Here is the cut. He used the word cut plainly, without emphasis, the way a doctor uses a word when they have decided the kindest thing is to be direct. He showed me the angle, the location, the reason it would not fail immediately, why I would have driven it for days, maybe a week, before the pressure dropped enough to matter. He showed me what highway braking without fluid looks like. He said, "I'm sorry to be the one telling you this, but I couldn't not call." I asked him if he could tell when it was done, before the car was on the lot or after. He said he couldn't say for certain. He said it had been done with something specific, something deliberate. He said deliberate the same way he said cut, plainly. I stood in that garage and looked at the photographs and felt the cold coming up through the concrete floor, through the soles of my ankle boots, and I thought about the morning, about Griffin's smile, about the red bow on the antenna that had already come partially unstuck in the wind, about how I had driven to work with the windows down because the car smelled new. I had been so happy about the smell. Simone made a call from the gravel lot while I sat in the passenger seat of her car with the door open and my feet on the ground. She had a contact at an insurance firm through her client work. She pulled threads for a living. She understood how documents connected to other documents, and she was very, very good at it. I watched her through the windshield, pacing slowly, her free hand moving in that way it does when she is processing information faster than she is letting on. She was on the phone for 22 minutes. When she came back, she stood at the open door and looked at me for a moment before she spoke. Just a moment. Like she was deciding how to hold the next sentence. She said, "Lacey, he took out a life insurance policy on you. $750,000. 8 months ago. It's in your name." The dishwasher running. The kitchen table. The folder. The little adhesive tabs. Just sign where the tabs are. It's refinancing stuff. I thought about the bicycle. Red. Spray painted. A little uneven in the dents. It's the same as new if you don't look too close. I had been looking away my whole life. I had been trained to look away, by my father who meant it kindly. By a childhood that rewarded smallness. By a marriage that selected me precisely because I was so practiced at accepting the surface of things. And here is what I want you to understand about that moment. It was not dramatic. I did not scream. I did not cry. I sat in that passenger seat with my feet on the gravel and the cold coming in, and I looked at my hands, my small hands, the scar on my left index finger from the copy center box cutter, the short, unpolished nails, and I felt something shift, not break, shift. Like a room where someone has opened a window that has been painted shut for years. The air doesn't rush in all at once. It comes in slowly, cold and real, and you feel it before you can name it. I thought about the stack of papers. I thought about the second phone. I thought about the November weekend and the soup I ate alone. I thought about every small thing I had filed away and told myself not to look at too closely. I thought about all of it, sitting there in the gravel outside Ray DuBose's shop on a county road I had passed 100 times without stopping. And then I thought, I am not going to look away from this. I picked up my phone. My hands were steady, I noticed that. Steady and cold. I did not call Griffin. I opened my contacts and I found a name I had saved once, on the recommendation of a coworker, without fully knowing why I kept it. Patricia Oakes. Family law attorney. I pressed call. Patricia picked up on the third ring. I told her my name. I told her I needed to come in today, that it could not be tomorrow, and that I had something she needed to hear in full before she decided whether she could help me. She did not ask me to summarize. She said, "Can you be here at 2 o'clock?" I said yes. She said, "Don't go home first. Don't move anything from the house. Don't send any texts you wouldn't want read back to you in a room." She said it the way Ray had said cut, plainly, without drama, like someone who had learned that clarity is its own kind of kindness. I said, "Okay," she said, "I'll see you at 2. I sat with the phone in my lap for a moment after she hung up. Simone was leaning against the hood of her car, giving me space, watching me with those fast, dark eyes of hers that always seemed to be about 4 seconds ahead of the conversation. I looked at Ray. He was standing by the garage door with the red shop rag in his hands again, not going anywhere, not intruding. I said, "Would you be willing to write down what you found? Keep the photographs somewhere safe?" He said, "Already printed them. Statement's been typed up since this morning. I was waiting for you to ask." I don't know why that undid me a little. Not the brake line, not the insurance policy, not even Simone's screenshot from November. It was this man, this stranger with grease on his hands who owed me absolutely nothing, who had already prepared a statement because he knew I was going to need it, who had already thought ahead on my behalf before I even knew I needed someone thinking ahead. I pressed my lips together and nodded at him, and he nodded back, and that was enough. Sometimes that is the whole conversation. I didn't go home. Simone took me to her apartment, which smelled like the lavender candles she kept on the kitchen windowsill, and Willa's crayons and coffee that had been sitting in the pot a little too long. Willa was at daycare. The apartment was quiet in the warm way, not the cold way. I sat at Simone's kitchen table, and she put a cup of coffee in front of me, and sat across from me, and we went through everything I could remember. Every document I had signed, every trip Griffin had taken, every time the finances had come up and he had redirected me. Every small thing I had filed away. Simone took notes on a legal pad she pulled from her work bag. She wrote fast, in her tight, compressed handwriting, asking precise questions without editorializing. She did not say, "I knew it," or "I told you," or any of the things she would have been entitled to say. She just helped me build the picture. By the time we were done, the legal pad had 3 pages covered front and back. I looked at those 3 pages and thought about how long I had been living inside this story without knowing I was in it. I met Patricia Oakes at 2 o'clock in an office on the 4th floor of a building downtown. She was in her mid-50s, short hair, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of woman who has heard everything and still listens like it's the first time. She let me talk without stopping me for 17 minutes. Then she asked 4 questions, each one more precise than the last, and by the 4th question I understood that she had already mapped the shape of my situation from the outside and was now filling in the interior. She said, "The insurance policy combined with the vehicle situation is going to be of significant interest to law enforcement. I want you to understand that." I said I did. She said, "You're going to need to be very patient and very quiet for a period of time. Can you do that?" I thought about my whole life. I said, "That's what I've always done best." She looked at me over her glasses for a moment and said, "This time it's going to work for you instead of against you." I drove back to Simone's apartment in her car. I could not go home. Not because Patricia had told me not to, but because the home itself had shifted. It was the same house, the same address. Griffin would be there by 6, expecting dinner or at least a greeting, expecting everything to be exactly as he had arranged it. And I could not be a person who walked through that door and behaved like I didn't know what I knew. I was not built for that particular kind of performance. I had spent my whole life not being that. I texted Griffin from Simone's couch. I told him I was staying at Simone's, that I had a migraine and didn't want to drive. He texted back a single heart emoji and the words, "Rest up, babe. I'll save you some dinner." I stared at that text for a long time. The emoji, the word babe, the casual warmth of it, the practiced intimacy, and underneath it, if I let myself feel underneath it, the cold fact of what it was covering. I put my phone face down on the cushion beside me. Simone came out of Willa's room, where she had been doing bedtime, and sat on the other end of the couch and pulled a blanket over her legs and didn't ask me anything. We watched something on television that neither of us tracked. Around 10 o'clock, she said, "You can have my bed, I'll take the couch." I told her I was fine on the couch. She said, "Lacey, take the bed." So I did. I lay in Simone's bed in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about the morning, about the driveway, about how cold the air had been, and how the red bow had been coming unstuck, and how I had thought, standing there, that this was what it felt like to be taken care of. I thought about what taking care of someone actually looks like. Ray Dubose, standing in a garage bay he had no obligation to stop in, looking at something under the hood of a car that wasn't his assignment. Printing out photographs. typing up a statement, waiting for me to ask. That is what taking care of someone looks like. I fell asleep thinking about the difference. The next morning, I called the Knoxville Police Department at 8:15. I was still in Simone's apartment. I had Ray's printed statement in my hand. He had driven it over the night before without being asked, left it in an envelope in Simone's mailbox, and sent me a text that said only, "It's there when you need it." I had Patricia's card in my jacket pocket. I had Simone's 3 pages of notes on the legal pad. If you have ever stood at the edge of a decision that you cannot come back from, if you have ever held your phone knowing that the moment you make this call, your life divides into before and after, then you know what those 30 seconds felt like. I stood at Simone's kitchen window and looked at the parking lot below, and I thought about all the ways I could still not do this. All the explanations that were technically still available to me. The factory defect, the misunderstanding, the coincidence. And then I thought about the highway, about what Ray had shown me, the trajectory, the pressure drop, the brake failure at speed. I thought about the drive home from work I had been looking forward to, the seats softer than my old ones, the full tank, the clean dash. I made the call. The detective who took my call was methodical and careful. He asked me to come in that afternoon. He said to bring everything I had. He said not to contact my husband. Here is what I did not know when I made that call. What none of us knew, not me, not Simone, not Patricia. Griffin's private debt, the $190,000 he owed to a private lender, had already attracted the attention of a federal financial crimes task force investigating that lender for a separate fraud case. Griffin's name was in documents that had already been flagged. The car, the insurance policy, my call to the police. It was a thread. And when you pull the right thread, everything attached to it comes with it. But I didn't know that yet. What I knew was that I was standing in Simone's kitchen in yesterday's clothes, with a mechanic's printed statement in my hand, and I had just done the one thing I had spent my whole life building the courage to do. I had looked directly at the thing, all of it, without looking away. That afternoon, sitting across from the detective in a room that smelled like old carpet and fluorescent light, I laid everything on the table in the order Patricia had advised. The insurance policy first, then Ray's statement and photographs, then the details of the purchase, cash, private contact, skipped inspection, then Simone's screenshot. Then the finance documents I had started pulling from email records with Patricia's help the night before. The trails that didn't match the refinancing story Griffin had told me. The detective was quiet for a long time after I finished. He looked at the documents and then he looked at me. He said, "Mrs. Whitmore, I want you to know, you did the right thing coming in." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because of how small those words were for what it had taken to get to that chair. I nodded. I folded my hands in my lap. The scar on my left index finger caught the fluorescent light. And then I went back to Simone's and I waited. Waiting is its own kind of work. It has a texture, a weight. I cleaned Simone's kitchen because I needed to do something with my hands. I helped Willa with a puzzle, 48 pieces, a farm scene, chickens in the foreground, and I felt the strange normalcy of fitting small things into their right places. Willa showed me which piece went where with the authority of someone who has done this puzzle 70 times and considers you a guest in her expertise. If you have ever been sitting in the middle of the most frightening week of your life, and a 4-year-old has handed you a puzzle piece and looked at you like you are the lucky one who gets to put it in, you know that it is possible to feel 2 completely different things at the exact same time. Terror and gratitude. Grief and something almost like peace. Simone came and stood in the kitchen doorway and watched us. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with those fast, dark eyes and she smiled. Not a happy smile, a steady one. The kind that says, "I see you. I'm still here. Keep going." I pressed the last puzzle piece in. Willa said, "Good job," with complete sincerity. I said, "Thank you, Willa." She had already moved on to something else. That night, alone in Simone's bed again, I thought about Griffin in our house, moving through the rooms, making dinner he had offered to save me, checking his phone, performing the ordinary evening of a man who has not yet realized the thread has been pulled. I thought about who he was underneath the performance. I had loved someone, genuinely, for 4 years. That person, the real one, whoever lived behind the smile, I would probably never fully know him. And that was its own particular grief. Not the marriage, not the danger, but the not knowing. The possibility that the man I had loved was a construction, and that somewhere inside the construction was a person who had been too afraid to be real and had chosen something monstrous instead of something honest. I did not forgive him for it, but I held it. I let it be complicated. Because the truth is never just one thing. And I was done, finally, completely done, with only looking at the surface. They arrested Griffin on a Tuesday. 11 days after the morning he handed me the keys in the driveway, with the red bow coming unstuck in the wind. 11 days. I know, because I counted them the way you count things when you are waiting for something you cannot control. Quietly, privately, like a small ritual that gives shape to time. I was at work when it happened, sitting at my desk in the open office, a half-eaten granola bar beside my keyboard, reviewing placement reports for a hospital system client. The most ordinary possible Tuesday. Simone was across the room on a call, one finger pressed to her other ear the way she does when she is really listening. The fluorescent lights were doing what fluorescent lights do. Everything was exactly as it always was. My phone buzzed on the desk, Patricia's number. She said, "It's done, this morning. I wanted you to hear it from me first." I put the phone down on the desk very carefully, like it was something fragile. I looked at the placement report on my screen. The words stopped making sense for a moment. Just shapes, just marks. Then they came back. I picked up my granola bar. I took a bite. I chewed it. Simone appeared at the edge of my desk 30 seconds later. She had seen my face from across the room. She always sees my face from across the room. She sat in the empty chair beside my desk and said nothing, just put her hand briefly on my forearm and then took it away. That was the whole thing. That was enough. Griffin called me from the station that afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table in our house, my house, the house I had finally gone back to, alone, to start understanding what I owned and what I didn't, what was mine, and what had been arranged around me like furniture. I had been going through the file drawer in Griffin's office, slowly and carefully, with Patricia's guidance, documenting everything before anything could be moved or disappeared. My phone lit up on the table with his name. I watched it ring. I want to tell you what that felt like, watching his name light up on my screen from a police station. It did not feel like victory. I want to be very honest about that because I think there is a version of this story where I am supposed to feel triumphant in that moment, where the music swells and the wronged woman watches justice arrive with a straight back and dry eyes. That is not what happened. What happened was that I felt tired. Deeply, specifically tired, the kind that lives in your chest and behind your eyes, the kind that is not about sleep. I felt the weight of 4 years. I felt the weight of every paper I had signed without reading, every question I had not asked, every morning I had woken up next to someone whose face I thought I knew. And underneath the tiredness, something else, something I did not have a word for yet. I let it ring out. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet. The file drawer was still open in the next room. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something it couldn't reach. The afternoon light was coming through the kitchen window at that low autumn angle that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. I thought about Griffin. Not the man who bought the car, but the one I had first seen across a dinner table. Certain, warm, the man who made everyone feel like they had his full attention. I thought about the proposal at this same kitchen table. The ring sliding across the wood, his face when I said yes. I thought about what Simone had said to me once, early in our friendship, about her sister who had stayed too long in a marriage everyone could see was wrong. The hardest part isn't leaving. The hardest part is grieving someone who is still alive and never was quite who you thought. I understood that now in my body, not just in my mind. I got up. I went to the kitchen window and stood there for a moment looking at the yard. The oak tree that dropped leaves across the back fence every autumn, the garden bed along the south wall that I had planted and Griffin had never once watered. Small evidence, the kind that doesn't mean anything alone and means everything together. Then I went back to the file drawer and kept working. What emerged over the following days, through Patricia and the detectives, and eventually a federal investigator who called me on a Thursday morning with a careful, measured voice, was the full shape of what Griffin had built. The private debt, $190,000 owed to a lender who was already under federal investigation for fraud. The cash purchase of the car through a contact who had no record of the transaction. The insurance policy I had signed without knowing. And underneath all of it, a real estate side investment that had collapsed 14 months ago and taken everything with it. He had been living inside a burning building for over a year and had not told me. He had been calculating exits. I was one of them. The federal investigation folded Griffin's case into its existing inquiry. His private lender was a thread that connected to other threads. The car became evidence. Ray's statement and photographs became part of a file that was significantly larger than anything I had understood when I was sitting in that garage bay looking at brake line photographs on a mechanic's phone. Patricia called me after speaking with the federal investigator and said, "I need you to understand that what you did, coming in when you did, with what you had, accelerated something that was already in motion. You didn't just protect yourself, you pulled the pin on something." I sat with that for a long time. I do not feel heroic about it. I feel like a woman who almost drove onto the highway in a car that was built to fail and didn't. Because a stranger with a red shop rag and 30 years of muscle memory stopped in front of a vehicle that wasn't his assignment and could not look away from what he saw. The margin was that small. It is still that small when I think about it. And I do think about it. The public narrative shifted the way things shift in a mid-sized city where everyone is eventually connected to everyone else through 2 or 3 degrees of shared history. I found out through Patricia first, then through pieces that reached me secondhand. A coworker who had met Griffin at a firm event, a neighbor who asked careful questions, eventually a woman from Griffin's office who called me, apologetically, to tell me that people were talking, and she wanted me to know that the people who mattered knew the truth. I thanked her. I meant it. I did not celebrate. I want to be clear about that. There is a version of this kind of story where the person who was wronged gets to stand in the light of the other person's consequences and feel the satisfaction of it. And maybe some people do. Maybe that is available to some people, and it is real and it is earned. For me, it mostly felt like standing at the edge of a very large hole and looking into it and understanding for the first time exactly how close I had been to falling in. That is not a feeling that has much room for celebration in it. What it has room for is gratitude, specific, named, directed gratitude. Ray Dubois sent me a card about 3 weeks after everything began unraveling. A plain card, the kind from a drugstore rack, with a landscape on the front. Mountains, which seemed right somehow. Inside, in the careful handwriting of a man who does not write many cards, he had written, "My wife died because someone didn't stop. I'm glad I stopped. Take care of yourself." That was all. I read it standing at my mailbox on the street, and I had to go back inside before I could get to the car. I sat on the front steps and read it twice more, and then I put it in my jacket pocket and kept it there for 2 weeks, the way you keep something that you are not ready to put down. His wife. 12 years ago. A brake failure a mechanic had missed. He had spent 30 years unable to look away from things that other people drove past. And on an ordinary morning, in a garage bay where he had no particular reason to stop, that inability had saved my life. I think about the architecture of that, the way one person's grief, carried carefully for 12 years, became another person's survival. The way things connect across time in ways we can't see from inside them. I called Ray and thanked him properly. He was quiet for a moment after I finished, and then he said, "You would have figured it out." I said, "I don't know if that's true." He said, "Well, doesn't matter now." He was right. It doesn't matter now. Simone and I had lunch the following week at the Thai place 2 blocks from the office that we had been going to every other Wednesday for 2 years. We sat in the same booth we always sat in, ordered the same things we always ordered, and somewhere in the middle of it, between the soup and the main, she looked at me across the table and said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said, "Tell me." She said, "I keep thinking about that morning in the parking lot, when you called me and said, 'Come outside, you can't say it inside.' I've been someone's person before, but I've never been someone's person in a moment like that. I want you to know I'm glad you called me. I looked at her. This woman who had sat in a parking lot and listened without interrupting, who had made a 22-minute phone call that uncovered the insurance policy, who had kept a screenshot on her phone for 3 months because she couldn't bring herself to delete it and couldn't bring herself to show it to me before I was ready. I said, "I'm glad I called you too." She nodded. She picked up her spoon. Then she said, "Next time you're marrying someone, can I just do a preliminary review? One conversation? I'll save us both so much time." I laughed. A real laugh, the kind that starts somewhere low and comes up without permission. It was the first time I had laughed like that in weeks, and it felt like something loosening in my chest, something that had been wound tight since the morning in the driveway, slowly beginning to release its grip. If you have ever had a friend who could make you laugh in the middle of the hardest season of your life, not by making light of it, but by reminding you that you are still in there, that the person who laughs is still present, then you know exactly what Simone did for me in that booth. Some people arrive in your life as proof that not everyone is performing, that some people are simply, completely, unreservedly there. Simone Adler is that for me. I do not take it lightly. I do not intend to. If this story has made you think about someone in your life who showed up for you in a moment when they didn't have to, who saw something you couldn't see yourself and told you anyway, who kept the screenshot, who made the call, who printed out the statement before you even asked, hit that like button. Subscribe if you're not already here, because that kind of showing up deserves to be witnessed, and so does yours. Now let me tell you how it ended. Patricia helped me begin the process of separating myself from the financial structures Griffin had built around me. It took time, the kind of time that moves in legal increments, in document requests and response deadlines and carefully worded letters. But it moved. Things that looked permanent turned out to be arrangements. Things that looked like shared foundations turned out to be one person's construction that the other person had been living inside without blueprints. I started to understand my own finances for the first time in 4 years. What I earned, what I owned, what was actually mine. There is something both humbling and clarifying about that process, about seeing the real numbers without someone else's narrative layered over them. My own checking account, with its $3,200, had seemed like barely anything when I was standing next to Griffin's confident management of everything else. Looked at on its own, it looked like a beginning. I moved through the house, room by room, over several weeks, understanding what I was keeping and what I was releasing. The couch, which I had chosen, the kitchen table, which had been Griffin's, the oak tree in the backyard, which belonged to no one and would outlast both of us by decades. The garden bed along the south wall, which I had planted and which would come back in the spring, regardless of anything that had happened inside the house. That felt important somehow. The garden not knowing any of it, just doing what gardens do.